So, hello and welcome to In Conservation With. It's a series of Zoom interviews, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, all about talking to people who are movers and shakers within the world of conservation. And In Conservation With was born out of lockdown. I was stuck in Spain on my own, no one to talk to. And I thought, I want to talk to some people. And I thought, I want to talk to some people, but ask them questions that I fancied actually hearing about. So I decided to create this whole thing, which is called In Conservation With. For those who are live now, this will be recorded. It's been recorded now and it will be on YouTube. And for those living in the future watching this now, I hope you've enjoyed it. Well, actually, you haven't watched it yet, but you're going to enjoy it. And please like and subscribe and tell all your friends. I'm sorry, I'm very lo-fi. I haven't got all the bells and whistles, and I can't point here and bing, something comes up and says, subscribe here. I haven't got all that stuff. You're gonna have to do it manually, but it'll be worth it because there's so many different people on this in conservation with compendium. I mean, this is a seventh series, but there's over 200 interviews of various people. And Gehan here, Gehan de Silva is my latest guest. Um, Gehan and I go back a while, but firstly, Gehan, how are you and where are you?
Evening, David, and evening, everyone else. Thank you to everybody who's joined us from all over the world. David, I'm very well, and I'm in London.
Good. Well, we've actually known each other for some time. I can't even remember the first time. I think, well, if I go back probably about 16 years now, I was once, believe it or not, this is one of the kind of things that people ask me now, can you tell us an interesting fact about yourself? And I sometimes struggle. And then I suddenly think, yeah, I was in the Guinness Book of Records in 2012 for the most amount of people making the sound of a wood pigeon using a swanning whistle. So that was one thing. And the second thing that people may not know is the fact that I used to be the chairman of the London Ornithological Society, I think it was, or London Bird Club, actually.
London Bird Club.
That didn't go well. And when I stepped down, the man that should have had the job stepped in, and that's Gehan here. And I think that's when we first kind of got to know each other, or am I wrong?
I think I first met you in person when you gave a talk at the London Wetland Centre, and then I came around and introduced myself. But I was also aware when I stepped in as chair of the London Bird Club that you were the previous chair, and it's possible we may have exchanged emails in connection with that as well. But I think the first in person was you were giving a talk at the London Wetland Centre, and I thought I must come around, attend it, and come around and introduce myself.
Oh, so that's a completely different story to what I had then.
That's all right. I think the important fact is that we go back a long way, and I guess we meet so many people in our lives. Sometimes it's difficult to work out where exactly you first met someone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know so many people. I just want to say, just for the record, that we actually are now live on Facebook, even though we're 20 seconds behind. So if you want to see anything that you missed, you've got 20 seconds to look back and see it if you're watching this now. But welcome to all the people on Facebook, all one of you probably. But you've just tuned into In Conservation With, and don't worry, because if you've missed anything, it will be on my YouTube channel, the Urban Birder channel, under the In Conservation section, and you'll find this beautiful conversation with Gehan de Silva, and it's all about his book, this wonderful tome, Wildlife of Sri Lanka, which I'm so happy to have had or been able to actually have a little cover line on this. So this is fantastic. So let me just start from the very beginning. Obviously, for me, you are one of the main characters in Sri Lanka, even though many people may not necessarily. I know you're frowning at me, but that's how I look at it. Um, you're one of the main characters in Sri Lanka, in that whenever I've been to Sri Lanka, People speak of you very highly. You are like the sort of the chief ambassador for the country when it comes to promoting wildlife. But where did your interest stem from? I mean, I presume you were born in the wonderful country. So how did you kind of become so fascinated not only with natural history, but natural history in Sri Lanka?
First of all, thank you for the compliments, David. So is that another tenner I have to send in the post? Has it gone on,
I'm
gone
less
up?
more than that. That's probably about 100 with inflation.
Okay, all right. I knew this was going to be expensive. Um, yeah, so, but before I answer that, can I just do another sound test? Can everybody hear me at right normal volume? If anybody can't, just say something in the chat or give a thumbs down. Otherwise, I'll assume I'm loud and clear. And hearing me at normal levels. Great. I'm getting a few thumbs up. Yeah. So going back to your question in terms of how did I get into this? So I was taken on leopard safari at the very early age of 3 by my uncle Gehan de Silva. And I used to just sort of live for those family holidays where I knew, we would pack the vehicle, and those days you'd pack your food, your fuel, everything. And my uncle had a sort of four-wheel drive vehicle, and we would head off to Yala National Park. And on the way, I would get up intermittently and see the forest around me and say, "Oh, have you got to Yala?" And he would say, "No, we still have a few more hours to go." And it would be like a 7-hour journey. And once I got to Yala, it was like I was in heaven, and I was just totally absorbed with everything I could see. My uncle was also one of the earliest bird watchers in Sri Lanka. And so he had a copy of G. Henry's Guide to the Birds of Ceylon, and he had a pair of binoculars, and he could actually put a name to things. So when the adults would have their afternoon nap, I would take his binoculars and his bird books, and I would be like, looking at the things around the bungalow. And I started to put names to things. And then when I was about 13, my neighbor and I decided to start a little wildlife society, just the kids in the neighborhood, myself, Asli Nazim, Jeevan William, etc. And then we realized that some of the birds I saw in Yala, I could even see in Colombo. So it's like, you and your whole urban bird thing. You don't necessarily need to spend 7 hours traveling somewhere. Just walk out of your house in the city and look up, and there are birds. So that's how I got into it. So it's a very early age interest.
And when you came to England, of course, that interest continued.
It did, and England was very formative because I came after my A levels. So the first 15 years of my adult life was spent in this country. And I went in university, I did an engineering degree and realized, civil engineering was not for me. So that I'll join the city and, train as a chartered accountant and get some corporate skills. But that interest in the outdoors and wildlife remained. And as soon as I qualified, I joined the London Natural History Society and the London Wildlife Trust. And then almost every Saturday and Sunday after that, I was out with like-minded people learning about the birds, butterflies, and dragonflies. So I absorbed all of this like a sponge. And so when I went back to Sri Lanka, I had a template or a model that, I was trying to sort of work to. And that's how my interest developed in, I wanted to put a name to the names of the dragonflies in Sri Lanka, but there wasn't a book. So then, I had to be one of the people who would set about trying to create something which people could use.
So when you were growing up in Sri Lanka, you were this budding birder, urban birder, I must say, in some respects too.
Indeed.
But there are many other people that were interested. I mean, I've noticed now, I've been to Sri Lanka literally for the first time maybe 10 years ago. So I noticed that there's birders then, but obviously before then, was there people interested in it?
So there was Sri Lanka is interesting in that because of the British colonial history, and because a lot of the colonial British were interested in wildlife, that interest had sort of entered mainstream society. And also Sri Lanka benefited from people like Jim Henry, who did the Guide to the Birds of Ceylon, W. Phillips, who did a fantastic mammal book, which, for 40 or 50 years was, the ultimate mammal book to go to. And only very recently, sort of supplemented by Asoka Yapa's mammal book. Then we had LGO Woodhouse, who was a surveyor general, who did a butterfly book. So Sri Lanka, at the time I was born, was getting off to a good start because of the colonial legacy. So there were many positive impacts from that. And then we had people like the very inspirational and visionary Sarath Kotagama, who went on to become a professor, who wanted to take bird watching to the masses, and he introduced a Sinhalese nomenclature for the birds, because at the time, and this is in the 80s, in the local languages, you didn't have a set of names for even the birds, which might seem surprising, but I think you may find this 20, 30 years ago in many countries around the world, that there may be English names or Spanish names or French or German names, but no names coined in the local vernacular. And then there was a group called March for Conservation. So it was a very exciting time to be there, because there were these people who were trying to popularize nature and trying to develop local field guides. And then, so that's when I was growing up. And then I came to the UK, and when I went back in 1999, so the start of the 2000s, there was Rohan Pityagoda, who's a bit of a genius and good at everything he does. And he set up the Wildlife Heritage Trust, which brought in a renaissance in biodiversity exploration. And he started putting together a fantastic team of scientists and describing new species of vertebrates. So I was lucky that I had these two very exciting periods where, when big step changes took place in how the public engaged with natural history, I was with people who were doing it, and I took a lot of inspiration from them.
Did you find, especially in the earlier days, people outside of Asia, i.e., I guess in the West, did they, I mean, even be more specific, in Britain, did they look at Sri Lanka as being India? Did they look at the whole of that region as being the same?
Yes, I think so. The bird watchers, the birders, were aware that Sri Lanka had endemic birds. So for the non-birders who are listening in, these are birds which are found only in a particular region. So if they're only found in what is both a geographical and political country, then it's an endemic bird to the country. So at present, depending on whom your authority is, there are 33 or 34 endemic birds. So if you're somebody accumulating a big world list of birds, you will have to come to Sri Lanka to get those 33 or 34 endemics. So even then, when number of endemic birds are considered between 22 and 26, the hardcore birders would come on organized guided birding tours to get the endemics. But interestingly, at that time, they didn't even go and look for leopard, because there was no awareness that Sri Lanka was a big game safari destination as well. And I remember when I went back in 1999, I mean, the country had only one professional field guide called Deepal Varkagoda, who was excellent. But the industry only supported one person in full-time employment as a birding tour guide. The situation now, 20, 30 years later, is very different. There are, tens of people who are full-time birding guides, and there are hundreds of people who are living off wildlife tourism. But not hundreds, it's actually in the thousands as estimated by the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society. Sri Lanka did benefit from things like the WNPS, the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, who are one of the oldest conservation societies in the world. We had a good forest department, we had a wildlife department. So we had that framework we had inherited from the British. So, things were just waiting to take off.
Okay. Well, listen, you have a presentation for us to see, and I think it'd be really good to show that because then it will actually give us a really good framework as to what Sri Lanka's about and how this all fits in, and plus how your book fits in as well. So why don't you set that up? And while you're doing that, I just want to tell everyone that I forgot to say that this is sponsored in conservation with is sponsored by Kawa. They are the purveyors of the wonderful Promenade telescope series and also the tour company Birds, Wildlife and Nature, who are all about trying to give people the best wildlife watching opportunities anywhere in the world. So thank you very much, guys, for sponsoring In Conservation With. And also just to let you know that you are watching In Conservation With. It's a series of Zoom interviews now being transmitted on Facebook to all two of you, probably, but check it out on YouTube, and that's where all the bodies of work in terms of all the conversations I've had over the years, over the last 5 years, you can find. So that was my little segue. Are you ready,
Yeah,
Gehan?
I'm ready. Shall I go ahead and share?
Please do. Please share.
Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so in terms of how I'm structured this, I will try and get through this in 15 to 20 minutes so that we still then have about 20 minutes left for Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to initially focus on just getting two messages across. That firstly, that Sri Lanka has a disproportionate or higher than expected number of species per unit area for an island of its size, and secondly that as an all-round package, it probably is unsurpassed as a wildlife destination. So the first message is really about the biodiversity. I'm trying to put some numbers and help people get their heads around the claim that Sri Lanka is exceptionally biodiverse rich. And the second is how that works with other things to support a fantastic wildlife tourism industry. And then I'll follow up with a few images that you get a feel for some of the wildlife. But I'm not going to, this is not going to be a slideshow with 40 wildlife images, just to give a flavor. And then I will talk about the latest book I have done. So on the first one, So first of all, I want to introduce this idea, this thing called a species area relationship. And what the graph on the left is saying is that, and this it doesn't have to be islands, but we're going to be talking about islands here. But roughly what it's saying is something that's intuitive in that the greater the land area, the more species you will have. Okay, so if you had some hypothetical, 4 islands, you might find the first one is about, say, 100,000 square kilometers, and it's about 100 species. And then if you had an island twice as big at 200,000, you may have twice as many species. And with island 3 and 4, if you've got 300,000 and 400,000 square kilometers, the species, whether these are reptiles or dragonflies, or if you're looking at things that are largely sedentary and confined to the island, you find the number of species go up. So, which means the species per unit area is then, then roughly having one species per 1,000 square kilometers, which is what then the graph on the right would look like. Okay, so species per unit area means, all these 4 islands, the density is just one in this simple example. But you have to compare like with like. So you can't look at Britain as an island and Sri Lanka as an island and then argue that Sri Lanka, something special is going on in Sri Lanka because it is so much richer. The reason Sri Lanka is so much richer is because it's near the equator. So if you're going to compare Sri Lanka, you need to compare Sri Lanka with other tropical islands. And in the next slide, what I'm doing is I'm comparing with Borneo, Madagascar, and New Guinea. And this is a fair comparison because these are, again, near the equator. They have tropical rainforests. They have mountains. So they are like enlarged version of Sri Lanka, and they are 10 times bigger. So if I look at these 4 islands, and if I say, okay, look at the number of dragonflies, birds, mammals, snakes, reptiles, amphibians, and work out the species per unit area, all things being the same and assuming they have the same structural topography and the same complexity, the species per unit area should roughly be the same. Sri Lanka ought to be less because it's a small area. It's 60,000 square kilometers compared to the other islands, which are about 600,000 square kilometers. So you'd expect it to be less. Now you can do multiple graphs for different things, but what I've done is one graph where I have said, okay, I'll look at, say, the birds per unit area for these 4 islands, and I'll take the lowest number as 1 to index it, and then I will compare it with the other islands so that the other islands are expressed as a multiple of that, which means I can have multiple groups on the same graph, which is what I've done here. And here you notice something very startling. Sri Lanka is the red column, and see how much higher it is. So look at what's in the center, reptiles. Okay, so green bar is Borneo, and the amber bar is New Guinea. So they both have roughly the same number of species per unit area, which is expected. And Madagascar has a little bit more because, again, it's got more structural diversity, so it's a bit higher. So it's about 1.5 times what Borneo and New Guinea is. But look at Sri Lanka. By that same measure, it's 13.7. Now, we didn't expect it to be coming out at 14 times high. We expected the Sri Lanka column to be slightly lower than those very large islands. And it's the same thing with snakes, 12 times more than the comparison group. With endemic birds, not so strong. And here you see New Guinea is quite high because special things have gone on in how New Guinea formed, and there have been lots of radiations of birds. Amphibians, again, Sri Lanka is nearly 10 times more compared to the lowest of the peer group. And you see that in freshwater fish, not so high, and there's a reason for that, which I might come to in a later slide. And for dragonflies, it is 6 times higher. Okay, so this is a comparison anybody out there can do. This is not a scientific metric. You just Google the land area of these 4 islands, Google the number of species found for these groups, put it on Excel, and you graph it, and then you come up with this amazing result, which is a way of explaining to a sort of non-technical audience the relative richness. So then you ask, why is Sri Lanka so rich? Okay, it's not uniform with the other islands, with these large tropical islands, and they had to have certain things that have played out. So broadly, I would say there are 3 categories: the physical factors, the evolution factors, and the human factors. So the physical factors, it's not just an island, it's a continental island. It's of ancient origin. The mountains, nobody really knows very clearly about the history of the mountains, whether this is going back to when it drifted from Gondwana or with its recent uplift. Then you got 2 diagonally blowing mountains and the central mountain range, which create distinct climatic zones. It's been isolated. It's been isolated from mainland India for nearly 6 million years, which allows things to speciate as endemic species. It's got mountain ranges, deep seas, close to shore, but shallow seas connecting the mainland, which allow intermittent connections. It's got 103 river water systems. So in terms of evolution, these intermittent connections and the species radiations that have happened have resulted in a very high species per unit area and very, very high endemism. So a quarter of the plants are endemic, over 90% of the dragonflies are endemic. Even with things like birds, which are quite mobile, it still has about 30, 33, 34 endemics. Then there are human factors which makes it wildlife rich. There are 2,000 man-made lakes, some of which have gone wild, and that supports large numbers of elephants. And the man-made lakes in national parks like Yala support populations of spotted deer, which in turn support high densities of leopard. So all these different factors coming together has made the country not only biodiversity rich, but also a fantastic destination for wildlife, because the shallow seas mean you can go whale watching easily. The human influences in the dry zone means it's very rich in leopards. And in the wet zone, you go to a place like Singaraja, half the trees you see are endemic. So it's not just the equatorial locations. So if you look at Sri Lanka here, and you can see that on the same latitude is the Horn of Africa, which is very dry and arid. So it's planetary scale factors, things like the monsoons and the interaction of the monsoons with mountain ranges, which have created something which is very lush and fertile. So it's not just latitude alone. And here we see what is happening, because you have the southwest monsoon, which is blowing from here. Can you guys see my cursor on the screen? Okay, great. And then you have the northeast monsoon, which blow across at different times. So when the southwest monsoon comes and it meets the mountains, it sheds a lot of rain in the southwest quadrant. The northeast monsoon brings rain as well, and some of it is shed over the mountains and some of it is shed over there. But what you have is in the southwest quadrant, very high rainfall. But it's not just absolute rainfall that matters, it's also the temporal distribution of rainfall. And Sri Lanka is unique in that it has what's called perhumid forest, and I'll come to that in a minute. Now, if there's so much of rain coming, why do we have a dry zone? And that's to do with the fact that in India, around here, you have the Eastern Ghats. So when the rain comes like this as a front, the rain that's going over India sheds its rain over the Western Ghats, which together with Sri Lanka forms a biodiversity hotspot. So the winds that come in the upper half of Sri Lanka have already shed their moisture. But the winds that are below India are still carrying their moisture, and they come and they meet the mountains in Sri Lanka and they shed it. And then you have this area here, which is very, very wet. Then you have areas like this sort of amber shaded bit, which is dry. And then you have these other areas, which is sort of a orangey, which is more like a yellow, which is very, very dry. It's very arid. So although it's a moderately sized island, the interaction of the monsoons and the mountains create a very varied and distinct climatic zones, the kind of variation you would normally expect across a subcontinent like India. So in the West, you have these lush rainforests, and Colombo, the capital city, is in the wet zone, and then you have this special feature that you have at least 100 millimeters of rain every month, and there's no prolonged dry period. You don't have 2 or more months where there's less than 100 millimeters of rain. So it creates what are called perhumid forests, which in the mid-Oligocene, which is about 23 to 34 million years ago, it spread all over peninsular India and extended to Asia, to Southeast Asia too, so Malaysia and then, the Indonesian islands. But in the Pleistocene about 12,000 years ago, it had all dried up, which means that between Africa and Southeast Asia, the only perhumid forests are in Sri Lanka. So what you see here is in a way a relic of what Asia was like between 23 and 34 million years ago, where you were having more than 100 millimeters of rain and you had these mixed dipterocarp forests. And the dipterocarps are the giants of Asia in terms of the trees. And connecting them is something called the Pork Strait or Pork Isthmus, which is very shallow. So when during the ice ages, when the sea levels went down, animals migrated from India to Sri Lanka. And as the climate became more hostile, those animals and plants which were in the southwest zone, they were isolated. So some of them have been isolated for about 6 million years, and they have speciated. And that's why you find with things like snakes and reptiles and amphibians, our biodiversity has gone through the roof relative to the size of the island. Now, the dry zone isn't actually that dry. There's 1,500 millimeters, but it all washes into those 103 river systems, or well, at least the river systems that are in the dry zone. But there are man-made lakes for agriculture which hold the water, and a lot of that civilization vanished. It's been reclaimed by jungle, but those water holes are still maintained, which means it supports large populations of deer. And then we have mammals like elephants, which need the water and the grassland, and leopard. If you search online, searching why Sri Lanka is super rich for wildlife, you find the 24-page PDF, which talks in more detail about this and has some of the graphs. The second message is that I'm saying as an all-round package, it's very difficult to beat Sri Lanka because it's compact, you can get around, and you go from everything from these cloud forests to lush lowland rainforest to seeing whales and dolphins and leopards and elephants. Note that I'm not saying Sri Lanka ranks number one in any of these categories. So I've identified a few categories which I think makes a place a great wildlife destination. Big game, rainforests, whale watching, skill guides, tourism infrastructure. So for each of these, I can say, yeah, big game, but isn't East Africa and South Africa better? Rainforests, the neotropics in Southeast Asia they have big extensive forests, they have more species. Whale watching is fantastic in the USA. Skill guides, come to Britain, you'll find a huge number of skilled wildlife guides. Tourism infrastructure, again, the G20 countries are better. But the thing is, Sri Lanka does have skilled guides. It does have very good tourism infrastructure. It's got fantastic whale watching, 90% encounter rate for seeing whales and dolphins. It does have rainforest. It does have big game. So when you take the whole package, it's just astonishing what you can see on a 10-day tour. So that's my two messages over. I'll just run through a few pictures now, just to give you a flavor of the kind of thing you can see, but just a few pictures. And again, I don't want to start off by going to a large national park. This is in Colombo. This is the capital city. These guys are found in central Colombo. This is the watermon. It's a huge lizard. It's the second largest lizard in the world. The largest is the Komodo dragon, Varanus commodore, and this is Varanus salvator. And when I'm in Sri Lanka, even if I'm stuck in Colombo because there are tours to attend and friends and family to meet, I go and spend an hour in a local wetland reserve. And to me, this is such an iconic predator to have an animal like this gliding along or come plodding past you. It's massive. It's a top terrestrial predator. To see that kind of thing is amazing in a city. And all these pictures you see on the screen have been taken in Colombo's wetlands. So these are wetlands in a hustling, bustling Asian capital city. And the number of species, Britain has about 50 species of dragonflies for comparison. I can go to some of these wetlands in Colombo and, you can see 30 plus species. Same again with the butterflies. And they're stunning. And once you're looking at these amazing insects, you might also see something like the western purple-faced leaf monkey. Imagine that, a primate in a capital city. And these guys are threatened because there's been a huge loss of habitat, but they still survive. There's conflict people because people don't build in a monkey-friendly way. They put tiles which are easily broken rather than roofing shades. And if you're prepared to travel around 4 hours from Colombo, then you come to these precious fragments of remaining rainforest like Singaraja, which is probably the one nature reserve in Sri Lanka you should visit if you go there. There's only 112 square kilometers left of it. But when you look at a scene like this, half the trees you see are found nowhere else in the world. There are 52 species of dipterocarps, the tall forest giants like the one in the top right, and 51 of the 52 are endemic to Sri Lanka. And it's possible, well, one theory is that the dipterocarps that was on the South Indian plate, or in the Indian plate, which had India and Sri Lanka, when it collided with Eurasia, the dipterocarps got off, and that's why Southeast Asia has a lot of dipterocarp species. Borneo, for instance, has, I think, something like 500 to 600 species. And in these rainforests is where you can also find the endemic birds, the 33 or 34 I mentioned. And sometimes you see many of them together in a mixed feeding flock. So Singaraja has a long studied mixed feeding flock study, and you find that the flock size and the number of species recorded is very, very good in relation to what's been observed elsewhere. And they're very stable. So in Malaysia, they just, the flock passes through in a jiffy, whereas in Sri Lanka, sometimes the flock is with you for about an hour. And because you're busy looking up at the birds, you might not look down and around you. But Sri Lanka has 21 agamid lizards, 19 are endemic. And on the right is the hump-nosed lizard, the only species in its genus. And if you're after the big game, then you go to Yala, which is here in the southeast. And this is where you encounter a very high density of leopard. Why are there so many leopards? Well, because there's a lot of protein. There's all this spotted deer, which are in a way artificially sustained at a high population because the water holes are managed. There are natural rivers as well. The leopard is the top predator. So, the top cat, you can sleep easy, and they've got used to people. This sub-adult was happy to doze off with about 10 safari vehicles that were well behaved watching it. And you sometimes get wonderful encounters like this backlit leopard. This is a leopard called GMC5, which I was very fond of. And sometimes you get some lovely behavior. I mean, after safari vehicles had left, I just stayed behind and I kept a distance from these leopard cubs, and they came up and had a look at me, and then they started playing with each other. You also have the sloth bear. It's a semi-specialist. It's lost some of its teeth so that it can hoover in termites. And look at the strong claws, because these termite mounds are as hard as concrete, and they tear them down. Then we have the largest recurring elephant gathering in the world. This is the largest annually recurring gathering of elephants. So in Africa, you may see larger congregations of elephants, but it's very unpredictable, happens during times of drought. What's special about Sri Lanka is it's predictable. So from about July, the herds start to gather, and between July, August, and September, sometimes from one field of view, you may see 100 elephants, and there are records of 400 wild elephants gathering. So this feels like a scene out of Africa, but this is in Asia, and which is why I've been saying that outside Africa, Sri Lanka is probably the best big game safari destination, because you can go on a game drive and see a good mix of mammals. And when the gathering is happening, you see amazing behavior. You see how the bulls have come in search of females, and they're bathing, and these sprays of mud and water. The whole thing is quite spectacular. Whale watching is good as well, and there are 3 sites. In the south, Dondra, Mirisa. And then in the northeast, you have Trincomalee, which is a big harbor. And then you have Kalpitia, which is a peninsula that sticks out. And Mirisa is a harbor as well. And when you sail out, sometimes blue whales approach very close. There was a time when I publicized that the encounter rate was over 90%, but because of probably changes to do with perhaps an El Nino condition or a La Nina, it's possible that the plankton blooms are happening somewhere else. And if the whales even move 50 miles, that puts them out of reach of the whale watching boats. So the encounter rate dropped significantly to almost nothing, but it's slightly recovering. Only time will tell whether it goes back to those incredible encounter rates. Similarly, there was a time when the superpods gathered at Kalpitia. It's possible that, again, if things revert back to what they were, we will see large superpods gathering again. And if you just go out and you just park your boat and wait, they swim right up to the boat and they investigate you. And they're profiling you using their sonar. And in Trincomalee, I was out with the children and I heard this loud bang. And we looked across and we could see a sperm whale breaching. Not a male, these are the females. The females get very excited when the males arrive to visit the pond. So quick time check, so 7:44. So I'll very quickly talk you through the book, which sort of segues into the Q&A. So the book is a massive team effort. As the lead author, I did 75%, but I invited 13 other people to contribute other sections. So I did the birds, mammals, butterflies, dragonflies, and co-authored the plants. But I brought in Sri Lankan experts to cover other areas because it was partly a way to showcase the abundance of talent in Sri Lanka and to give them a chance to be published by an international publisher like John Beaufoy. And also, it just meant that I didn't take another 10 years doing the book. We could bring out something which could be the one book you take out, which helps you to identify, a lot of what you see. So it covers 90% of all the birds, mammals, and dragonflies. It's sort of catering to that wildlife tourism market. Has half the butterfly species and probably covers like almost all the butterflies you would see. It's a fairly simple formula. With most groups, it's 6 species per double page spread. So you'll have 6 images on the right for the 6 species and text on the left. My text particularly tends to be very identification oriented so that you can put a name to things. So I'm only showing you a couple of pages because I don't want to take a lot of time running through everything, but you can get a sense of how it works. And I'll show you what the book looks like when I stop screen sharing. So the book took me 5 years in terms of when I decided to collect the material after John Beaufoy invited me to work on the book. But it probably goes back at least another 10 years because there were other naturalist guides which John had asked me to do, which laid the foundation for a book like this. And in a way, it's like a 25-year-old project because I've done something like 25 or more books over the last 25 years to showcase the incredible nature Sri Lanka has, and also to develop a tourism industry with nature, underpinned by nature, so that there's an impetus for conservation. So big thank you to everybody who's supported me on the journey, from publishers to press to friends and family to all the people in the state agencies and private sector supporters, etc. And in terms of what the book looks like, let me just unblur my screen for a moment. So as you can see, it's sort of typical field guide size. So here's a field guide to the birds of Sri Lanka, done by John Beaufoy. And it's sort of field guide shape, field guide thickness. But the amazing thing is this has 1,180 species from marine fish to land snails to birds to everything. So I think that's a good point for me to hand back to David because we still have 30 minutes left for Q&A and we can discuss things more.
Okay, well, listen, that was a really interesting introduction for those who don't know about Sri Lanka, and also for those who think they know about Sri Lanka. That was a very interesting look at the island. I mean, I was quite surprised by the when you compare with the other islands, for example, and how rich Sri Lanka is for wildlife. I mean, when I first showed up, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm an urban birder, so I was in Colombo, and I was looking around thinking, I'm in the middle of a park, which is the equivalent of being in Hyde Park or Central Park or whatever, and there's pelicans flying overhead. There's pelicans sitting in the little pedalo pool. There's bats. There was just all sorts of wildlife in an area which, on paper you would never think there'd be much wildlife in. And I've had many, many special memories of Sri Lanka. I mean, for example, Yala, as you mentioned. I mean, I saw my first leopards there, and we saw them within the first, before we even got to the entrance, we saw them. It was absolutely incredible. And for me, I was very excited because I'm a bit of a wetlands boy. When I sort of saw the wetlands, I said, "Leave me here," because I was looking at all the stuff that was there. I mean, some of the birds that I saw were birds we see in Britain, like redshank, but then there was painted snipe. There was different pratincoles and stuff. It was just fantastic. So, and for me, one of the pinnacles, of course, and it's worth getting all the leeches for is to go and look for the Serendip scops which is a bird which has only been sort of known to science for 20 years or something now or something.
That's right, yeah, early 2000s when it was described.
Yeah, so I mean, the islands have so much to offer, and I'm really happy that being a tour leader myself, I've noticed over the years that there has been a much more bigger appetite to go to Sri Lanka, which is great. But one thing I will say, and maybe you can sort of let me know um, how things have developed, because this one question that people often pose to me when it comes to Sri Lanka is the whale watching side, because I know in the past it was all about loads of boats chasing the whales. Has has that changed now? Have people realized that actually they can't be doing that?
Sadly, no, David. I think, yeah, it's a bit difficult to understand why there's there isn't more sort of active and interventionist management by, say, the wildlife department. So, like, if you go whale watching in British Columbia, you find the waters are patrol by, whichever the local state agencies that is responsible for marine wildlife, and they will confiscate the license of any boat that approaches within 100 meters. And with things like the orca pods, they actually ask you to be 200 meters away. So not only are the boat operators sort of in a way self-regulating themselves and following that code because they know that's what's good for the whales and that's what makes the experience good. You also have that additional guardrail with the state agencies out in the water every day. So that unfortunately still hasn't happened, but not everybody is irresponsible, and Sri Lanka has had the WDC whale and dolphin conservation, for instance, going out several times running training programs. We've had local marine biologists like Anuke Langakun, who's been involved with them, and also even without them, has been writing about this, running training programs, etc. There's a lot of local marine conservation organizations of various sizes that are also using social media to educate people and to call for more enforcement. So, and there's enough money from the tourist receipts. So I hope we will see the wildlife department stepping up and saying they're going to run a patrol boat during the whale watching season and start enforcing ethical whale watching.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I've only ever done the whale watching once in Sri Lanka, and actually my experience was good because the boat people had respect and they kept away from harassing whales, which is good. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, I mean, Sri Lanka, is what, 67,000 square miles or something like that.
Yeah, 65,000 roughly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, around 60,000. Yeah.
And has a population of what, 23, 22,000
Yeah,
people?
about 22 to
Million.
23 million, of
Yeah,
which at least 2 to 3 million are overseas at any given time.
yeah. I wanted to know the relationship between that population and the wildlife and the habitats. And I know you mentioned previously that Sin Haraja um, is 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 depleted as to what it was before. What is the situation? Is there protections in place for habitat? How is tourism, is wildlife tourism helping the case for protecting some of these areas?
So I think the wildlife tourism is emerging as a very strong force to make people want to hold on to what is left, because ultimately it's all about livelihoods. And what I tell people is that national parks and reserves are political constructs. They're artificial. They're not some inviolable natural unit. So if what the people want out of Yala National Park is more land for agriculture, they will vote in politicians who will do that and de-gazette it and remove it as a national park and make it available for paddy cultivation. But that is very unlikely to happen now because there are 300 to 500 safari vehicles that are getting an income out of tourism in the park. And then there are hotels. So if you look at the number of people who are employed, whether it's as a pool attendant or a room attendant or front office receptionist or general manager or chef, um, when you have tens of thousands of people who are earning a livelihood, and taking tourists on a game drive and showing them leopards is a much more comfortable and easier life than being a farmer. Because not only is farming hard work, it's very unpredictable. You could have too much rain or too little rain, and you lose your crops of the year, and you're on the brink of poverty. So this is a more stable income. It's a more comfortable income. So although the number of safari vehicles is an issue, and there are very easy ways that can be managed, which has been done many times all over the world. So despite the problems, I think those are good problems to have, because if you're saying there are too many safari vehicles, it just means you created this dependency on a natural resource, and you know that the local people want it to be a national park. They want the local and foreign tourists coming. So there's an impetus for conservation. Now, when you go to the wet zone, unfortunately, a lot of that was cleared for plantations. So a lot of it is lost during the 19th century, during the British colonial era. But I mean, it's not a case of pointing the finger at anybody. I mean, a lot of countries have gone through this development phase and they've lost it. You see that in the UK in the 1950s. Britain lost a lot of its woodlands for agriculture again. So it's the same story, but the question now, of course, is will people hold on to what's left? So again, you have this tussle. Some people will lobby the government to release some of the forest lands for agriculture, and then you have the conservation lobby saying no. We need to hold on to this for ecosystem services, which includes climate risk mitigation, the biodiversity, and the tourism. And this is again where tourism plays a part, because if you are living on the boundaries of these lowland rainforests, and if you want to send your children to school or provide for the family, you can either work as a guide, which is an option now, or you can surreptitiously cut down some of the forest and grow tea. So 30, 40 years ago, people were growing tea, they were clearing the land illegally. But now, where they can earn a living as a wildlife guide, again, it's a easier and more stable income. So again, tourism is playing a good part. There's another interesting factor in Sri Lanka, a cultural factor, because it's a Buddhist country. People, they will clear land for agriculture, but they don't sort of wantonly kill animals. So even if a venomous snake enters a house, a lot of people will rather take the snake out rather than kill it. So it's almost like as a sense of respect for other living things is sort of baked into the psyche, uh, which is very, very helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because I remember someone speaking the other day telling me about the fact that you got so many people living in Asia. I mean, countless millions. And then you look at the West and there's far less people, but there's far more damage to the habitat and there's far fewer species. And it's quite incredible that you have places like, for example, India, where you still have, massive apex predators like tigers living, which would never happen, even like in US or somewhere like that. There's no kind of space for those kind of creatures yet. For some reason, there is in the Southeast Asian area, and that's, as you say, because people have respect. I mean, we can talk quite a lot about all of this. I mean, I'm always flying a flag for eco-tourism. I think that, more people should go to Sri Lanka and other areas like your country. And there is so much to see, and there's amazing food as well, and the hospitality is fantastic. I mean, it's one of my favorite locations. Um, if you were to just say one thing to draw someone to come to Sri Lanka, what would it be?
I would just say it's such a beautiful and amazing country with friendly people, good infrastructure. Yeah, I mean it's probably the best all-round wildlife destination in the world.
Well, that's fair enough. I'm hooked. I'm coming. What is your favorite Sri Lankan animal, may I ask?
It's got to be the leopard. I mean, it's such a charismatic and iconic animal.
And very stupid question now. If you were to be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be?
I would love to be in the Horton Plains in the cloud forest and just watch the mist drifting in and shrouding the trees.
Yeah, funny enough, I was in the Hotton Plains last August, and I remember seeing for the first time that blackbird you got there. I can't remember what it's called now. Is it the?
Yeah, it's Indian blackbird. It's a potential split.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was a split. It looked completely different to me.
Yeah,
Anyway, I want to thank you, Gehan de Silva, for being here today
pleasure.
and for promoting this great book, which I think is the Bible you need to bring with you whenever you find yourself going to Sri Lanka. Bring this with you. You got to bring it with you. I wish you the best of it, and and I hope that we personally get to meet again very soon. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, David, for having me, and thank you everybody for joining. And I hope those watching it on YouTube enjoyed as well.
Great. Thank you everyone for watching In Conservation With. And please, if you're watching this in the future on YouTube, you know, press that like button and subscribe and keep on looking up.